e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight into e5, knight c6, knight into c6. This is Stafford Gambit. Hi, I am Amit, and today we are going to learn how to play against Stafford Gambit. And for that, we need to understand all the chess traps and tricks involved in Stafford Gambit. And then we are going to see the solution to the Stafford Gambit and how to gain an advantage against it. Black plays d into c6. Here Black has sacrificed his pawn for better development, and as you can see, he has opened up the diagonal of both of his bishops. At the same time, he has a knight which is developed on f6 who is attacking your e4 pawn. Now here White should defend the pawn by playing pawn to d3. Now remember, if you are able to dodge all the chess traps of Stafford Gambit and you are able to complete your development, then White is better because he is up a pawn and he has a better structure. Black plays bishop to c5. The correct move for White over here is to play bishop to e2. If White plays bishop to g5 in order to pin the knight, then he will fall into Black's chess trap. Here Black can play knight into e4 and sacrifice his queen. White has two options, either he can capture the knight or he can capture the queen. If White plays bishop into d8 and accepts the queen sacrifice, then Black can checkmate White by playing bishop into f2 check, king to e2, bishop g4 is checkmate. And after knight into e4, if instead of capturing the queen, White captures the knight by playing d into e4, still Black can win the game by playing bishop into f2 check. Now White has two options. If White plays king into f2, then Black can win White's queen by playing queen into d1, and Black is clearly in a winning position. And after bishop into f2 check, if White plays king to e2, in that case Black can again win White's queen by playing bishop to g4 check. And now it is forced for White to play king into f2, queen into d1, and this position is clearly winning for Black. So you should always be aware of these chess traps, and that's the reason that if you are White, I would recommend you to play bishop to e2 to develop a piece. And remember, the bishop is defending the queen and controlling the g4 square. Now the typical move for Black is to play pawn to h5, as he is planning to play knight to g4 and attack White's king side. If Black plays a normal move like bishop to e6, in that case White can castle short, or White can play pawn c3 with the idea of d4. Here Black plays h5, which is considered to be the main line of Stafford Gambit. I would recommend you to play pawn to c3 in this position. If you castle short, Black can play knight to g4 now. If you play bishop into g4, then Black can play h into g4, and Black has opened up the file of his rook, which he can use to attack your king. And if White plays pawn to h3 to kick the knight, then he is in a big trouble, as Black can win the game by playing queen to d6. Black is threatening queen h2 checkmate. So if you play something like pawn c3, Black can simply play queen h2 checkmate. If you play something like g3, Black can play queen into g3 check. Remember, the pawn on f2 can't capture Black's queen as it is under an absolute pin. So the only move for White is to play king to h1, and Black can play queen to h2 checkmate. If you capture Black's knight by playing h into g4, Black will play h into g4, and now he is again threatening queen h2 checkmate. So if you play something like knight to c3, Black can play queen h2 checkmate. If White plays something like g3, Black can play queen captures g3 checkmate. And that's the reason, instead of short castle, I would recommend you to play pawn to c3. Here Black plays knight to g4. If Black plays something like bishop to e6 in order to develop his pieces, White should play pawn to d4. This move closes the diagonal of Black's bishop, attacks his bishop, and even increases the grip on center. So Black can save the bishop by playing bishop to b6 or bishop to e7. Now remember, the pawn on e4 is under attack, so White should play knight to d2. Black plays queen to d7 such that he can castle long. Now White wants to develop the bishop which is on c1. But if White moves his knight, the pawn on e4 is not defended. So White should play queen to c2 to defend the pawn on e4 such that in the next move he can play knight to f3. Black castles long. Now White can play knight to f3, which opens up the diagonal of White's bishop and increases the activity of knight. Now let's say if Black plays something like king b8, White can castle short, or he can play bishop to e3 and go for long castle. In this position, White is better because he's up a pawn, he has a better pawn structure, he has successfully completed his development, and he has a good grip on center. Now let's analyze the main line of knight to g4. Black is threatening knight into f2, so White should play pawn to d4. That was the purpose of c3. This closes the diagonal of Black's bishop, attacks the bishop, and also removes the threat of knight into f2. If Black saves the bishop by playing bishop to b6, White can play h3 and attack Black's knight. If black plays something like queen h4, white can play pawn g3 and attack black's queen. He has to save the queen, and in that case we can win the game by capturing black's knight by playing h into g4. That means black has to save the knight by playing knight f6 or knight to h6. If black plays knight f6, white can play bishop g5 with the idea of e5. And if black plays knight h6, white can capture the pawn by playing bishop into h5, or he can castle short, or even he can develop a piece by playing bishop to e3. In all of these variations, white is better because he has successfully dodged black's trap. At the same time, he is up a pawn with a better structure and a good grip on center. So after d4, the main move for black is to play queen to h4. Now black is threatening queen into f2 checkmate. So white should play pawn to g3, which saves the mate and attacks black's queen. Queen f6, and now again black is threatening queen captures f2 checkmate. And here I would recommend you to play bishop to f3. Here f3 is an option, but that will simply complicate the game because black can play pawn to h4, as after f into g4 black can play h into g3, and now black is threatening queen to f2 checkmate. And remember, you can't play h into g3 as rook into h1 check is coming. Bishop e3, rook captures h2. Now rather than deeply analyzing this complicated variation, I would recommend you to play bishop to f3, which is safe and gives you an advantage. Now bishop to f3 saves the mate. Remember, h4 will not work because white can simply win a piece by playing bishop into g4. So that means black has to save his bishop, which is on c5, so he can play bishop to b6. Now white can attack black's knight by playing pawn to h3. So black has to save his knight by playing knight to h6. White develops a piece by playing bishop to e3. If black plays h4, white can simply play g4, and he is threatening g5 double attack. So queen e7, knight d2, and white is again better in this position. So here instead of h4, black plays bishop d7 in order to castle long. White plays knight d2 in order to develop a piece and provide an extra support to the bishop, which is on f3. Long castle, queen e2 with the idea of long castle. As you can see that we have successfully dodged all the chess tricks and traps of black, and this position is better for white because white is up a pawn, he has a better pawn structure, he has completed his development, and he has a good grip on center. If you want to learn more chess traps, you can watch our playlist of chess opening tricks and traps. And if you want to improve your attacking skills, you can watch our playlist of attacking chess. So that's it for the day, my friends. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.